Let's get straight to business today. You may have seen it already because it's flying in the cinemas. Yes, what am I talking about? The new movie about Elvis, directed by Baz Luhrmann, starring Austin Butler, brilliant as Elvis, and the wonderful Tom Hanks as Colonel Parker in the movie, and more besides. The movie is flying, but when I tell you today, there is an Irishman who wrote a book some years ago about Elvis Presley called Elvis and Ireland, and recently he attended a private screening of the movie at the Omniplex Cinema Complex in Drogheda, and I tell you this, the audience will vouch for this, he stole the show, and he's with me today on Late Lunch. I'm delighted to welcome Ivor Casey to the show. Hello, Ivor.
Hi, Gerry. How are you?
I'm really good. Thanks for coming in to us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Tell us about you and Elvis and your connection with him.
When I'm back in the 20th anniversary of Elvis's death in 1997, I was 13 at the time. There was loads of television shows about Elvis all day long. It just felt like it was Christmas time, because there was this atmosphere of Elvis all over, and I was drawn into his charisma. I started watching his shows, all the concerts, Aloha from Hawaii, the movies about him, his own movies even were great fun because they're very much geared at a younger audience, and I was captivated by him. I thought he was fantastic, and then some years later I was going for the Leaving Cert. I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do at the time, but I loved writing and I loved Elvis, so I thought I'll just write a book about him. Came up with an original angle, which was to draw on all his influences here, on how rock began and how rock began in Ireland, and how was the reaction to Elvis in Ireland, because I had discovered before that in America he was very, very controversial. So I was wondering what was going on here in Ireland. Was he controversial here? And I came up with some interesting conclusions to that.
And to say the least, was he controversial here? Because you can only imagine when he came on the scene, conservative Catholic Ireland, where, things were controlled by the church and the state, really very, very strongly indeed. And this fella comes on the scene, gyrating his hips with this new type of music. He was condemned from the dial and the pulpit, wasn't he?
That's correct, yeah. We had priests all over the country running him down like this is the agent of Satan and the devil's music. Yes. And then the doll, that was the very interesting part of what I found, was that he in 1959 there was a couple of politicians who felt Elvis's music was very controversial, but it was generating great revenue for overseas channels like Radio Luxembourg, and because of that then they discussed whether he should be played on Radio Warren, because there was a debate over Elvis music, this devil's music should not be on our airwaves. So they realised that there was a big lot of money coming into Radio Luxembourg. So eventually, over a couple of courses of Dáil debates, Elvis's music trickled into the country on our own airwaves.
So both from pulpit and politically, the man was a no-go at that stage. Was his music banned on RT at that time?
It was kind of unofficially banned. When you had the priest saying something, they just gave into it,
Yes.
But what was strictly banned or censored were the movies. Elvis's movies were heavily censored based on Catholic moral thinking, and the censor at the time was a man called Liam O'Hora, and one of the movies ended up being banned, which was King Creole. They wanted about 7 or 8 cuts to the movie, and the studio wouldn't give those cuts, yes. And therefore the movie ended up being banned in Ireland. Can you imagine King Creole by today's standards?
I'm just thinking here, what were we like when you think back to those times? An Elvis movie and not allowed. Yeah. But it was that was the way of the world at the time in this country for sure. How did he ever come to Ireland? Did Elvis play Ireland?
No, he never played in Ireland. He never played outside of America other than a few shows in Canada, and then he did a 2-year stint in Germany when he had to go to the army. But the closest he got to Ireland was flying over the Donegal Hills when he was on his way back to the States. So,
and yet he reached, and his reach had huge influence here.
Huge, enormous, because you began with the show bands. The show bands in the 50s, you had Brendan Boyer, of course, probably the most famous of them, all imitating Elvis's style and trying to bring Elvis to a wider audience through their live shows. Far more tame now were the show bands than Elvis, because Elvis was very, very raunchy sexual kind of performances, which led to like a huge criticism and condemnation. Not the kind of same now the show bands would have got, but it was a way of trickling Elvis into the country on some level, which was great. And then you out of that then came Rory Gallagher and more raunchy performance than Phil Lynott, Thin Lizzy, and all those guys were hugely influenced by Elvis. And
they've told you this. You've written about this extensively. They confirmed that his influence on them was immense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I see. Well, of course, sadly we don't have Rory or Phil with us anymore, but there's plenty of research and plenty of interviews from documentation where they have referred to Elvis as one of their major influences.
And Bono, of course, is another man who'll credit him with.
Huge, yeah. Bono's a massive Elvis fan. Bono even imitates some of Elvis's clothing. He's that much of a fan. He's covered several of his songs. Went to Graceland as part of a tour of America, and Larry Mullen actually is the bigger Elvis fan of the group, of you too. Very, very big influence. And
on the other hand, Elvis himself covered Irish songs too.
Yeah, that's correct. Elvis was very influenced by tenors, Irish tenors. A lot of people don't know that. Elvis's influences were gospel music, and most of all blues music and the formation of rock and roll. But Elvis really loved tenors, and during an interview in Germany, he was asked about his interests and what kind of music he liked, and Elvis said he had a keen interest in Irish tenors. Went on to record Danny Boy, I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen, and other songs like O Solo Mio, which was transferred into It's Now or Never. Hugely influenced by.
You obviously gave the talk ahead of the screening I mentioned last week in Omniplex. I say it again, very impressive, great reaction to it. What did you make of the movie?
I thought it was excellent. Absolutely excellent movie. It's 45 years now almost since Elvis died, and there hasn't been a big proper Hollywood biopic of him, and this is the first one. You had Kurt Russell do a TV movie back in 79, but this is really lavish, and not only lavish, but it's trying to really get to the core of Elvis's influence, and it certainly does. In the first hour you get all that huge controversial influence that Elvis had, his challenges to conservatism and segregation, all this kind of influence, and then we go in deeper into his own personal story and his relationship with Colonel Parker, which was played by Tom Hanks, and excellent. And Austin Butler is absolutely terrific as Elvis. A lot of people were a bit skeptical when they saw him to begin with, but he really studied Elvis. He got his voice down, he got his movements down, and he really is a great actor, truly. And is it a greatest hits show as well? All the music is there. Yeah,
great selection of it.
That's right. You have Elvis's voice play a lot of the time, and some of the scenes you do have Austin actually doing some of the singing. It depends on the scene what calls for it, and it was edited superbly, and it's absolutely a terrific movie.
Coming back to your book, not alone do you write about his connections and all involved with Elvis here in Ireland, but talk to me for a moment about the Irish artists that are involved in this book of yours.
You mean the painters now?
Yes.
Well, the cover is painted by Nuala Holloway.
It's beautiful. Show me the book here, because I know you have it. You have it with you there. Fantastic. Yeah, look at that. Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful oil painting.
Yeah.
And I've other artists in it, Jackie Moore and Don Conroy, whom a lot of people will know from The Den back in the 80s and 90s.
Now you're talking.
Yeah.
That rings a bell, I'm sure, with a lot of listeners today.
This portrait of Elvis.
Oh, Don is brilliant. So many were attracted to art with him, and that he's in there as well. But what about Nuala Holloway? Aren't they just beautiful?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some wonderful sketches inside. The reason I end up with artwork like this now is because when I went to... the book is self-published, so trying to obtain photographs of Elvis was extremely difficult for me. A lot of publishers wanted me to provide my own photographs. Almost impossible. I was born 6 years after Elvis died. The chances of me having my own were very unlikely, and to access photos as a self-publisher, it's really complicated stuff. So I ended up getting artists, and it's one, Nuala Holloway.
Fantastic. She's here with us in studio today. I just wanted to mention that they're gorgeous. They absolutely are gorgeous. They really are, and they're so true to life as well. When you think of him today, and as you said, this is the first big screen thing that's happened, since he made the movies himself. Yeah. Those ones you mentioned that were banned. Why has he laid dormant, do you think, in that sense for so long?
That's a interesting one, because you've had everybody else have a movie made, almost everybody else anyway. 2 years after Johnny Cash died, there was a big screen movie, and we've had Freddie Mercury recently, and there's been one about Aretha Franklin, only came out last year, and
Elton John,
and he's still alive. So it's an interesting one. But I think what you've had is there's so much opinion about Elvis, and there's so many points of view that, and a lot of that came from his entourage, who came out with lots of their own books and their own stories, and most of them have passed away now. This is my own theory on it, that it took until those guys to fully come out with their stories for the full in-depth story of Elvis's life to be truly out there for us to grab and take what we believe or don't believe from those guys. And some of them we just don't know whether they were actually telling the truth. Were they leeches? Were they?
Yes, of course.
Some of them were, some of them weren't. Some of them were loyal, some of them were grabbers. There's no way of really knowing. And I think now that all those kind of people are gone, sadly they've all departed, that maybe good point. Now was the good time for a movie. Yes.
What about anecdotes in the book? You have several. Your favourite, or one or two that you like to tell?
Well, one of the interesting ones is a man not far from us down in Swords, Maurice Colgan. He received letters from Elvis back in 1961 at the height of his career. Maurice, with his wife Maureen, who sadly passed away a few years ago, they were living in England at the time, and Maureen had a very serious health problem. And Maurice, they were young Elvis fans at the time, and they contacted Elvis. Maurice wrote to Elvis, just as kind of a last-ditch attempt for some sort of, hope and cheerfulness. And Elvis wrote to them, wrote a letter to Maurice, and he wrote a letter to Maureen. And Maurice still cherishes those letters today, and it was absolutely fantastic. Elvis took time out of his busy schedule to write, and wrote letters of well wishes to Maureen at the time.
Personally written to them.
Yeah.
They are valuable.
Absolutely.
I take it at this time. Not to be parted with, because they're of such enormous value, I'm sure, to people. Anything else that that when you were working on this that you love to talk about?
Well, I love the Dáil notes, even beyond the Oireachtas notes, is where they were controversial. Talking about like Elvis's revenue, they actually brought up Elvis in the mid-60s complaining about his income, which was unusual.
Why in Dáil Éireann?
In Dáil Éireann, yes. They brought up that Elvis was making more money than JFK at the time. He was making more money than the Prime Minister of England, and why people were spending all their money for the gyrations of Elvis rather than the wisdom of all these world leaders, which was brought up in during discussions in the Dáil. So I find that quite amusing, that stuff like that would be cropping up there.
Wasn't it just so ridiculous? But, they had to, I suppose, try and nail him
I know, trying to.
with something or discredit him in some way. But, he's known as the king, and rightly so, because, we talk about the Beatles in the context of, rock and roll and popular music. This man, he came from before.
That's
and
right.
moved into the...
Oh, yeah. Well, in the 50s, doing blues music was hugely controversial.
Yes.
People, they accuse him of appropriation, but he grew up with blues music. Elvis grew up right in the centre of it all. Like, it was like oxygen to him, the blues music. It wasn't like it was on another neighbourhood. It was his neighbourhood. He was raised right in the middle of blues music. And he carried that forward and brought it. He had the privilege of being white to bring that music to a mass audience that, unfortunately, at the time, black singers weren't getting at the time. And Elvis brought it forward for everybody to hear. And we're all the better for it.
When you think of the segregation and everything that went on, and the strife, and my God Almighty at the time, and he had to negotiate that, navigate it as well. I love this book. Elvis and Ireland, Ivor Casey. Where is it available?
It's available on Amazon at the moment. I'm always trying to get it into bookshops. Self-published, it's always a difficult struggle. Easy. But I'm always on the outlook for somewhere else that will stock it. And
I have to say, you've made a magnificent job of the book. You really have.
Thank you.
As a self-published author, you really have. And the cover just speaks for itself, the illustrations within, the stories, etc. Folks, Elvis and Ireland by Ivor Casey. The music's flying high. This book is about his context Elvis in Ireland. Well worth getting and reading. Thank you for dropping into us today to have a chat on the show. Thank you for your comments. Keep them coming to me. 086 1800 658 by WhatsApp or text. Gerry, I can vouch for that book. It's a brilliant book about Elvis in Ireland. I got a copy myself. Well worth getting and reading, says a listener. Thank you indeed. We love to hear that from you in Late Lunch Land.